Hello and welcome back to Living History with Ted Goldsborough and our guests Caryn Musil and Bob Jordan. Bob, when we took a break, Bob was telling us about telling us about a broken window in the gymnasium, and we have to finish that story, Bob.
Yes, when you were showing us the picture of the back of the school, I noticed the windows that were part of the gymnasium, and they were low to the ground because the gymnasium was sunk into kind of like a basement area. And I remember throwing a ball to someone, and he missed the pitch, and it hit the window and broke the window, or at least cracked it. Yeah. And I was very embarrassed and didn't want to go to Mr. Roddy and confess, but my parents sort of encouraged me to go to him. I saw him as kind of stern in a way, but actually he was a very kind and understanding man. And when I confessed that I had broken the window and was willing to pay for it, then all was forgiven.
That's good.
And so
good lesson.
Yeah, it was a lesson in morality, and honesty. Yeah.
And you confessed to your parents.
Yeah, I did confess to my parents. That's true.
Which some of us might have kept quiet. Right. Speaking of Roddy, Mr. Roddy was a principal at the school, and he followed Mr. Drennan. And why are we here? What brings you two from unknown states?
Well, I'm here because Pete Tyson, who is a Narberth graduate, is having his 50th reunion for Lower Merion High School. And he said, that is happening tomorrow night, and he said, why don't we have some Narberth people meet the night before? And the classes were so small, he said, let's do cross-class connections. I think you let me know that was happening, and then I and others began to try and pull in people. But I think it says something about how tied people in general are to their youth and their childhoods, but particularly if they grew up like we did in Narberth, where it was like a Norman Rockwell world, very innocent, a small town, everybody knew you, you wandered around freely, and the school was a center for us. So the chance to reconnect with childhood friends that even you hadn't spoken to in 50 years has been just wonderful. And the traffic back and forth through email and sharing pictures has been like reconnecting your life and making it whole again. It's been lovely.
And your two siblings are here too.
My sister, who's 4 years younger, and my sister Sheila, who graduated 2 years before. And I actually gave 66 as my graduation from Lower Merion, but that was really my college. The two of us are from 62 out of Lower Merion and 58 out of Narberth.
Okay. Thank you.
Just for the historians that are watching.
I caught that. But yeah, 66 is when I graduated from college.
Oh, okay.
But I knew Caryn and Caryn's two sisters. They lived in the house right behind mine. They were on Wynwood. We were in Narberth Park. And you contacted me about the reunion, and then you told me to get in touch with Mr. Tyson, which I did, and I found out that the McTighe sisters were going to be there, and that there were going to be other folks who I really wanted to reconnect with. Like Caryn was saying, I mean, these were folks that we were close to because our school was very community oriented, and that it was small classes, and so we knew everybody, you know. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity, much more of an attraction to me than going to a high school reunion where in Lower Merion we were kind of lost, or at least I was. You know.
And it's interesting, at our I did go to our high school reunion. There was only one other person, Lorraine Blessing, who went from that class, but there are 11 of us who are coming to this, which says something.
Yeah, would prefer to come to Narberth.
Yes, it's interesting.
Right.
Well, the demise of the old Narberth school that we knew, And I was surprised in reading, this is called the chronology of key events about the closing of the school. And I was surprised that as far back as 1952, Narberth School District was having problems. And there were discussions about what are we going to do about this. I guess the costs were so high for the taxpayers. And believe it or not, Narberth's taxes today on their property taxes are almost double Lower Merion's. And the reason is they don't have a city avenue with high-rise buildings and offices. And
To have income.
so not much income. For example, a house in Narberth Park, the property taxes in Narberth and Montgomery County are about $9,000 for a modest house in Narberth Park, whereas our house in Ballacumwood, they're $5,000. It's just the same house, almost same square footage, you know, everything. So poor Narberth was stuck with, had these 2 stone buildings with a lot of teachers that they had to pay and pay into the retirement system, Social Security, and they just couldn't do it. The buildings were getting old, wooden floors in some cases, fire hazards. In the primary building, and this is quite a bit earlier, but it indicates problems with the building, a ceiling collapsed as a teacher was teaching. And the kids had to duck under their desks and, you know, plasters falling all over the place. So they decided in 1961 to demolish the school, both buildings, and build a new school. And when I look at these, it's kind of sad because I think about the music room, Miss Fricky, our music teacher. So then the new building was built in 61, 62, and I was kind of surprised because that's in September of 61, and I guess this plaque is saying during those years the building was built. And it's interesting, some of the names, because some of these names were people that we went to school with, like Parthmore.
Edward Dean Kay, Mr. Kay, I remember him, and Mr. Robb.
And Mr. Purse, Dr. Purse.
Dr. Monroe Purse, Okay, so then we have some pictures of the new building, and this building is still there. It was used as a school for about 8 or 10 years, and finally it got to the point where Narberth just couldn't handle it anymore. So they turned it over. They asked the Lower Merion School District if Lower Merion would adopt it, take it into the school system. And for a few years, from about 67, 68, I don't know, was Kathleen?
Kathleen actually told the story to me that she became an elementary school teacher, and she did some practice teaching or something here in this school while it was still a K through 5 or 3 or whatever it was.
Some of the upper grades were sent up to Ardmore.
She went up to Ardmore after 7th grade. So of the 4 of us that went, my sister Mary, Sheila, and I, and Kathleen, she's the only one that didn't get the 8th grade at Narberth, complete with prom, sports day, and all those other things we'll get to talk about.
I put in a picture of some of our faculty. This is a little before your time, but I believe Mr. Roddy's on this side and Mr. Drennan, so they were 2 long principals. And then Mrs. Brenner, who was a 7th and 8th grade geography and penmanship teacher, and Miss Taylor was the home ec teacher. Mr. Ogden is one of these, one's Trippeson, one's Ogden, was the school board. And Mrs. Shields, Mrs. Shields was Nellie Henry, 4th grade. Did you have?
She was my teacher. I loved her. She was wonderful.
I had Mrs. Shields.
And she read to us, and she did wonderfully creative things in class.
And she discovered that I was nearsighted. Before that, I did not know I was nearsighted, and after that I got glasses, and I could see the board finally.
Your grades improved, I'll bet.
I think they did,
She and her husband built a house on Dudley Avenue right next to Sabine, so it was real handy. And that's another thing to mention, that many of these teachers lived locally and walked to school.
Mr. Harkness lived right across. Miss Levis lived right
across. Miss Levis down the street. And Mrs. Brenner rented an apartment down on Dudley. I was her Mainline Times delivery boy, and I was always very careful to put her paper just so. Okay, that was for Mrs. Brenner's retirement. I put in a couple of pictures. We have to watch our time here because we're getting to the end of a show. But Mrs. Brenner taught us penmanship, and so I brought in a pen. This is the kind of a pen that we used in her class, and the nib, it's called, comes out. And over time, those nibs kind of wear because of the friction. So you can replace the nibs, and you dip the nib into the pen. And then I, at home last night, drew some circles and letters to show the kind of exercises that Mrs. Brenner had us. And then when we were in about 7th grade, we were introduced to Esterbrook pens and fountain pens, and it has a little rubber thing in there, and you put that in, and it sucks the ink up. And instead of having to dip this about every 3 words, this will last for maybe a week.
And then there was Bic.
Yes, that's right. And when they came out, there was quite, I remember at first, it would sometimes leave a blotch of ink there, but eventually they got perfected. Here's a picture here of Mrs. Brenner, and she taught for 50 years, which seems, I guess she began at 18, and they let her stay on until she was 68. But she was the old-time disciplinarian, and if you misbehaved, she had a chair rung. I don't have one here handy, and she kept that on the windowsill next to her, and she had an old wooden chair that would swivel.
Yes.
And when she went to reach for that rung, the chair would go, ee, and we'd all go, what's going to happen?
Behaved.
And then she'd grab that, and then she'd head out, and we thought, oh, she's going to get it. And she was pretty mean. She'd hit you up in the collarbone up here, and it would really hurt. Well, I see that we have to take a break here, and we've wrapped up this session. And I very much appreciate, and we'll continue. We're going to do another show. This is Ted Goldsborough signing off with Dr. Caryn Musil and Dr. Bob Jordan. And this is Living History, and we'll be back for another show.